1 minute before 9 o'clock. Nevertheless, okay. I am proposing to start today's first session 5A. And the speaker is Nickolas Pappas from New York. And the second speaker is Un from Korea, a young scholar. And the third is, I guess, Hua K-Ho from Taiwan. And with these three speakers, we will do a beautiful first session during 90 minutes. Beforehand, I would like to introduce myself one more time. My name is Chang-Uh. I am teaching at the Department of Philosophy at the Catholic University of Korea, a small university which is located in the close vicinity of Seoul, or in the southwestern part of the great metropolitan Seoul. So I am focused, as you, like all of you, on ancient philosophy, but I'm teaching diverse things such as ethics or modern political philosophy, for example. Okay, that's about myself. Let's go into the directly into the presentation. The first presentation, the first speaker is Professor Nickolas Pappas. As far as I can remember, Professor Pappas is the author of the introduction book. The book name is The Rhetoric's Guidebook to Plato's Republic, published in the mid 1990s. And I think he has other publications. So I would like to suppose, Professor Pappas, you introduce yourself shortly, 1 minute or 2 minutes, yes. Because I guess that there are some people who do not know about you. So you introduce yourself 1 or 2 minutes shortly, and then go into your presentation directly. So you can start, please.
Thank you so much, and I will. Greetings to everyone. My name is Nickolas Pappas, or Nick Pappas, and I teach at the City University of New York. These days, I'm at the philosophy program of the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank IPS Asia chapter, and specifically the organizing committee of this extremely well-run conference. I can only imagine the challenges of putting together a conference under these conditions, but you know, I'm learning a lot. I'm enjoying a lot. All the sessions that have been immediately recorded are available to me. So although it was 4 o'clock in the morning for me when some people were speaking, and I fantasized that I would get up on time, and I'm sorry I did not, but I did watch the lectures, so I got to start my day preparing. And as Noboru will hear, I touch on a passage in the Republic that he illuminated very much in his talk. And as I say, under the circumstances, one can't imagine it being better. Thank you all. My talk is titled Sightings of the Soul. What accounts for the simultaneous insubstantiality and power that images possess in the Republic? Like shadows or like reflections, they come and go, instantly forgotten. Their unreality explains the insignificance of a tyrannical soul's pleasure, for such a soul feeds on empty calories of simulacrum, where the philosophical soul finds sustenance in a feast of true being. And yet, quite unlike shadows and reflections, insidious images are so strong that the Republic uses language of sorcery and of magic spells to characterize them. How do we think about images on both models at once? Then, too, and famously, we find images deployed by philosophers in the dialogues. In the Republic, Socrates appeals explicitly to imagistic language, for instance, when narrating the soul's advancement out of ignorance. Not only permissible, such image talk seems to be desired, accomplishing as it does more than philosophical discourse could manage without it. Here too, images have force, even if we are relieved to find their power acting for the good. The question of the power that images have overlaps with other issues in what we may call Plato's aesthetics. It leads into the question of how images are related to the soul that perceives them, and into the practical question of how much control a soul may exercise over the images it encounters. But today, rather than unite the energy of images with other topics, I would like to contribute to the conversation by isolating this topic and following a few threads out from the dialogues to the culture in which Plato wrote them. Specifically, these are loose threads in the argument of Republic 10, not fully explained by the argument's logical structure, and therefore maybe, or so I'm going to propose, calling for their explanation from the world outside the Republic. The thread is loose where the stitching does not close up in an argument. Something fails to align. In the two passages that concern me, a claim or an example is repeated, but a difference enters into the repetition. And so I'll be looking at two passages from Book 10 that are both passages of repetition, but with a difference. So first, consider the three-part rankings that condemn mimetic artistry. After distinguishing among the form of bed and table, the beds and tables that carpenters make, and imitations of the appearances of such things, Socrates then separates out the imitator in a second way. He looks at an aulos, we can call it a flute, it's only barely a flute. He looks at an aulos or a bridle, this time according to 1, the knowledge with which these things are used, 2, the correct belief with which they are made, and 3, the ignorance with which they are depicted. And from this perspective too, we are to see what goes wrong with mimesis. Now this ranking nearly repeats the first one. It keeps the roles of the maker and the mimic, only removing the god in favor of a consumer. And yet the knowledgeable user of the aulos cannot be an entertainer who played such instruments at a dinner party. Nor does the bridle imply the expertise of someone on horseback, not when the Republic has imagined a military that fights on foot, the horses only approaching the battlefield with ignorant guardians' children on them watching the fight. If we want to align the second ranking with the first one, asking how could a god belong in the top position, we may remember that among the Greeks, a god really was the supreme user of both bridle and aulos. I mean Athena, the great civilizing god who goes almost unmentioned in this dialogue. Her name only appears once. Athena was the first to bridle a horse. In some parts of Greece, she was worshipped as a bridler or a horse tamer, even if Athens itself, that city of mimesis, had so forgotten her as to call a newly adopted Thracian goddess by that title, He Theos, the she-god, usually specific to Athena. And even if Athens had compounded its blasphemy with a race on horseback in honor of this arriviste, Bendis. In the old stories, Athena's bridle captured Pegasus so that Bellerophon could ride him. In case he had not come across the story elsewhere, Plato would have known it from Pindar. And Pindar also reported the story of Perseus and Medusa. Athena helped Perseus, and it was then, as the Gorgon sisters wailed, lamenting Medusa's death, that Athena invented the wailing cry of the aulos. So she used the flute before anyone else did too, as she used the bridle. Now here's a god at work, a god represented as expert, also one represented as overlooked by a city rendered so ill by mimesis as to introduce new gods into its pantheon. The mimetic artist is no Athena, and the city that harbors mimetic artists threatens to forget who she is. The flute and the bridle now do artistically something they had done mythically, which was to rebel against the Olympian order. The satyr Marsyas played the flute in his challenge to Apollo's musicianship. Bellerophon bridled Pegasus and tried to fly him up to Mount Olympus. The imitator replays the stories of those who, on the one hand, imitated Athena, on the other hand, in their ignorance, sought to deify themselves. Mimesis deploys a power not its own, as Marsyas and Bellerophon did, in defiance against the governance that brings knowledge to humanity. No idle example, the bridle and aulos describe a rejection of the city's protective divinity carried out in the spirit of rebellion against Olympus. Against what does imitative art enact its sorcerous rebellion? Book 10 points the way to that answer too, again with a possibility that it signals and then removes from sight. Book 10 begins with a list of objects represented in art: humans, artifacts, earth and sky and everything. And Socrates lists those objects twice to trivialize the imitator's accomplishment. First, he says that someone can make A and B and C and D. And then he says to Glaucon, quote, "You too could make A, B, C, and the rest if you ran around with a mirror and pointed it at everything." And when he does that, when he goes from A, B, C, D to A, B, C, Socrates does not repeat his first list, he abbreviates it. The second time he omits gods and he omits, quote, "what is in Hades," which is to say, the shades of the dead. Being invisible, gods and shades will not be reflected in a mirror. Socrates could not argue that the artist imitates the appearance of those invisible things, nor that mimesis grabs hold of part of their appearance. So why mention the gods at all? The argument has Homer and tragic drama in its sights, and the gods did appear on the tragic stage, but I don't think Socrates is thinking of drama. His inclusion of the sky and human furnishings makes a poor fit with Greek tragedy, in which even mentions of a table are scarce, let alone the appearance of a table, and in which the sky above is part of a play's performance only in the trivial sense that the performances took place outdoors under the real sky, not the representation of it. If the list of objects imitated diverges from what mimetic poetry talks about, it makes an exact fit, however, with the visual arts. Every visible thing appeared in painting and sculpture. Visual art is probably also being assumed in that repeated remark that with a mirror, you can even reproduce yourself. That is, that imitators make themselves with their mimesis. Tragic playwrights did not include themselves in their plays, but one notorious episode does accuse the sculptor Phidias of doing such a thing. For on the shield of his great statue of Athena, it was said, that's the Athena in the Parthenon, Phidias depicted both himself and Pericles fighting against the Amazons. Anyone with visual art in mind would include the gods. Think how many statues of gods appeared in and around Greek temples, on the streets and doorways. We don't even have to guess about the souls of the dead when Athenian gravestones are plentifully available down to the present day, and they attest to a tradition that represented those lost persons now unseen in Hades. So this repetition in Book 10 likewise suppresses the supernatural element, including gods and dead souls, to establish the breadth of subjects in visual art, including the gods and the dead souls, in order to establish the breadth of subjects in visual art, and then excluding them so as to make the argument about imitation possible. The art of the invisible bypasses...
Sorry, Professor Pappas.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I have not spoken. I have not spoken the time limit. You have a time limit. We have total 30 minutes, and the 10 minutes is for discussion, and you have 20 minutes, and you have a spare 11 minutes for your presentation. So I would like to inform that.
So thank you.
So
I appreciate that. Okay.
So you go ahead, please.
Do you want me to go faster?
No. I would like to suggest, or I would like to inform that you have 11 minutes for your speaking, and then we go into discussion, and then we hand over,
of course,
to the next speaker.
That's perfect. Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay. The art of the invisible bypasses the terms in which the Republic criticizes imitated appearances. It includes works for which mimesis does not arise as a problem. The long Greek tradition that used statuary to connect the unseen world with the world of sight relied on symbolic links, not on likeness, therefore not on the mimetic strategy of generating likeness. By the mid-20th century, Jean-Pierre Vernant and scholars of ancient culture who preceded him had demonstrated the uses of non-iconic sculptural objects in Greek religious practice. Such sculptures might connect with their objects through negation instead of resemblance. For example, a colossus, an eyeless figure planted in the earth, had its effect on the wandering soul of someone who had died far away. Being blind, this figurine evoked what was unseen. Immobile, it captured the shade that floated free. Socrates could not have pretended that holding up a mirror in any way resembled this mode of signification. More recently, other scholars have shown how Greek statuary in the centuries before and including Plato's facilitated communication with the gods and stood in for lost humans, often, as Deborah Steiner says, thanks to a metonymic relation rather than through metaphorical resemblance. A plank that washed ashore on Samos is taken to manifest the presence of Hera. Literary characters speak of marble figures that connect people with their absent spouses. The phenomena that these scholars bring to light turn up inside Plato's dialogues. This is what I find interesting. Socrates, facing death, acknowledges that the ghosts hover near a tomb. To his way of thinking, it's a sullied sort of ghost that hovers, the soul of someone so enamored of bodily pleasures as to cling to this last memory of the now cold body. But even so, the gravestone has a communicative effect. You might criticize people who stay on the phone too long, but you're not saying that the telephone fails to work. Rather, it's the successful operation of the phone that entices the chatty person to go on talking, as it is the grave sculpture's success at connecting with the spirit world that keeps the soul of a glutton or a drunkard just hanging on, staying connected to the bodily world. In the Phaedrus, Socrates, outside the city walls, discovers a site to be enchanted thanks to the statues he finds there of nymphs and of the god Achelous. What matters and what works on Socrates is the invisible divinity for which he thanks the statuary, not because those objects capture the look of Achelous or the look of a nymph, but because thanks to the fact that they were dedicated to the beings they are, those statues make passage possible, communication between the known world and the realm of the sacred. Plato's characters don't have to believe in the efficacy of such objects to realize that other people do, perhaps to suspect that there may be something in these superstitions about tombstones. Thus, we find the Athenian stranger. He's not frightened, but he recognizes that even in the well-planned city, some people will worry. No trickery has bewitched such people. No arguments against mimesis will work as a counterspell, because visual trickery is not the cause of the belief. The statue that represents a soul but does not mimic it, does not try to imitate its appearance, remains left over among the artifacts at the start of Book 10, and its exemption from the critique of mimesis suggests an explanation for one class or cohort of images in the Republic and other dialogues. Speaking now of the philosophers' images, I have in mind the Platonic imagery that represents the unseen soul. Within Book 10, Socrates compares the soul to the sea god Glaukos. In Book 9, he shows Glaucon how to fabricate an icon, a likeness of the human inner life, a chimera of human, lion, and monster, encased within what looks for all the world like a single human. The casing, like one of those novelty figures of Silenus, explains why non-philosophers remain ignorant of the anthropotherian within. Thus, the complete image represents the soul as an invisible entity, or more correctly may be said to represent the invisibility of it, as Alcibiades' reference to Silenus figures in the Symposium does with reference to the invisible beauty of Socrates. Now in Republic Book 9, Socrates directs Glaucon to put this image together as one makes shapes out of earth or another soft material. The verb plaso, to mold, appears 7 times in this passage, sometimes Socrates saying it, sometimes Glaucon. Glaucon compares the shaping he's doing to working in wax. It's the same verb that Hesiod uses for what Hephaestus does with clay when he molds Pandora. In the Republic, the verb joins with graphein, draw, to describe everything that mathematicians do when they make the shapes they study. In other words, sculpting the solids and drawing flat shapes. Not to put too fine a point on it, Glaucon is sculpting. He's working in the medium of logos, more malleable than wax, as he says, but still aiming to produce a statue that connects with a soul. This language harks back to what Glaucon had done in Book 2, what Socrates there described him as doing anyway, when he located invisible justice and injustice in people's souls. And here, of course, I'm grateful to Noboru Notomi for his remarks on this passage in his address, I guess, yesterday. Socrates said in Book 2 to Glaucon, "You polish each of them as if he were an Andrianta, a statue, not merely to deliver truths about the unseen soul, but really to call the soul forth, to make it available as it had not otherwise been. One uses sculptural objects." The dialogue's remarks about tombs belong with these representations. A tomb is statuary or includes statuary. The tombs of heroes attracted ritual attention in Greece as means of communication with those heroes. All tombs facilitated communication, in fact, not only in the form of a sighting when some nostalgic shade loiters near its grave, but also because the shade will end up passing along into Hades. And if you know the long tradition in Greek and Roman civilization, for nearly 1,000 years, they would write curses on bits of lead and put them near the graves of newly perished people so that they could carry the infernal message down to powerful underworld beings. So when Plato has Socrates in Orphic language call the body a tomb for the soul, that word tomb posits the representation of invisible souls. It associates the gods with that representational act, given that they insert souls into bodies. And so it suggests an exemption of some imaging from the usual arguments. Bodies play the role of figuring, of representing, or often of obstructing the sight of the soul. However unfortunate the imprisoned condition of embodied souls may be, its sculptural implications return us to the domain of divinely efficacious statuary. You rarely escape your tomb, but then that's because those entombed rarely have the will and the wit to free themselves. So too, souls in bodies, only exceptionally able to manipulate their prison so that it will free them. When Socrates quotes the Orphics, he uses the word sema, which means tomb, but also sign. The tomb stands where it is, cold and silent, but it signifies the last known presence of the absent soul. The mode of signification is anti-iconic. A philosopher may care for someone else's body and attend to it for the sake of the soul within, but not because the body looks like the soul. Just as a motionless colossus connects hopefully with a wandering ghost so that the ghost may come home and cease wandering, so too inconsiderate bodies attract souls. The proper task of those souls should be thought and heed for their dematerialized well-being. But what has ever been more heedless than a body about the soul's fate when the body lies rotting, or even about the soul's temperate good health when the body lives? There's a passage I could also cite from the Laws. I'll skip in the interests of time, about the analogy between statues and bodies, the Athenian stranger, about how we care for statues in the home, and we should care that way for aged parents too.
Okay, can you summarize or can you conclude within 1 minute?
Yes, thank you. The illusions I'm speaking of and what I call the consequent repression of divinity may seem oblique. The bridle and flute move delicately away from mention of gods only to invoke Athena. The delicate omission of supernaturally effective statuary signals what a proper use of visual art could be when visual art orients itself toward the world of the invisible. The deadly power in mimesis comes of its rebellion against Olympian rule, while the power that art had before mimesis was the result of its proper communication with gods and souls. Both times, artistic mimesis presumes upon, but fails to reproduce the divine effectiveness of art. How indirect are these allusions? I'm in the last paragraph and a half. As I read the passages, the divine power that mimetic artists play with is power that goes without saying. The religious implications would have been clear in the time that the Republic depicts during the Peloponnesian War. Inside the conversation of the Republic, we find an old man making offerings to the gods, presumably with the help of statuary. But outside in Athens at large, it is a time when statuary can be vandalized, as we know from the incident of the mutilated Hermes. Athena protects Athens, but the Athenians' zeal to expand into Sicily, for which they need a fleet, therefore lumber, therefore good relations with Thrace, brings them to turn against Athena and put an other horse-taming she-god in her place. Perhaps aptly, the Athenian who persuaded his city to sail against Sicily, the same one accused of mutilating the Hermes, looks to have been the model for the Republic's tyrannical soul. Alcibiades has the soul that feeds on images, and we have a hard time saying whether he represents great power in the end or instead evanesces to nothing, as shadows do. He thought he could mimic divine initiation, but repeating the show of the mysteries without the god's presence constitutes only a boast of power, charming and spellbinding, as boasting can be, yet lacking the needful power over death that is divine in philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you for Professor Pappas. I would like for your understanding, because I have intervened. Since my role is time tracking, so you should understand.
Of course.
My intervention. So thank you for your wonderful presentation. There are some stops that typical philosophers cannot or ignorant of, because for example, sculpture or tomb culture or something of art of history. But our theme is images. So some stuff beyond philosophy can be imported in the proper sense. So is there anybody who would like to ask any question? Okay, William Altman, Professor Altman.
Thank you, Nick, for that really original and poetic paper. I'm a little taken aback by what our host said, because it didn't seem to me that you departed from philosophy by one iota. But I guess what I want to press you on, and it was a beautiful paper, Nick, really. I mean, time and time again, well, let's not go into its merits. I want to push back on the question of the degree to which Athena is really absent. And to really see how important to your argument that is. I was delighted that you called attention to something that's too often ignored, which is that theos traditionally means Athena. And of course, the revelation, if such it is, that the theos is Bendis, is only made at the end of book 1, and only made by Thrasymachus the Thracian. In other words, that when Socrates says he's going down to pay his respects to the goddess, we know, we who are Athenians, who are entering into this world that you have conjured for us, a truly Athenian Greek world, in a beautiful paper, we know that's Athena, Nick. That he's paying his respects to Athena. And I think that what your paper suggests to me is that Athena is really present in the argument from the beginning, and then through your beautiful discovery of the aulos and the bridal, all the way through to the end, but that she actually wins. That Alcibiades is like the tamed Marsyas challenging Apollo, and that it's Thrasymachus that substitutes Bendis for Theos, and that the victory over Thrasymachus when we hire a herald in book 9 is Athena's apotheosis, and in a bigger sense, because the whole Republic, with its celebration of dialogue in this beautiful city, is a hymn to Athens and the city of the goddess of wisdom. And that there's still plenty of room to say that this was the first time there had been a celebration to the goddess in the Piraeus, because of course the celebration was normally up on the hill. So I just wonder how critical it is to your theories that Athena is supplanted.
Oh, thank you so much. Look, you just gave me 10 great ideas, so I can't respond to all of them. I'm quite happy to follow out the thread of what you're saying and to see Athena's presence throughout the Republic. That's terrific from my point of view. I mean, because we seem to be agreeing that she's not present for the Athenians. It's the Athenians who seem to have forgotten her, or Athenians under the influence of Thrasymachus, not Socrates. I'm fine with that. It's still interesting that she's only mentioned once. I don't know why the Republic is so shy about Athena. For that matter, just to get us off track a little more, I don't know why the Menexenus leaves Athena out of the question of Athenian autochthony and just makes everything the work of the earth. That's a conversation for another, few weeks we could spend. But you're quite right. Nothing depends on Athena's being absent from the Republic, and the more that she's found to be at work subterraneanly, the happier I'd be.
Right.
Okay, the second question from Noboru Notomi, Professor Notomi. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, I make a short question. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. And you vividly gave us some image of the visual art in Athens in Plato's time. But the difference between visual art and spoken images. How different? That is my question, because the sculptures, statues try to represent the invisible things, so it is sometimes hard to represent. But in words, it's very easy to say gods or Hades and others. So how do you think there's a difference?
Yeah, well, you're quite right. They're different matters. It's interesting to me that, well, first, as you know, the Republic draws attention to the fact that Socrates makes images, right? With the famous one in Book 6 of the ship and the people on board ship. But also, it's interesting that Socrates, when they're giving images of the soul, I mean images and words, he's the one who compares those to sculptures. As in the two passages I cited, when Glaucon compares the just and unjust man, and when Socrates tells Glaucon to fashion the soul. And then, of course, we have the famous comparison between the city that they're giving an image of in words to a painting. So you're right, they belong to different families, but it's interesting that Plato is having Socrates trying to marry those two families together. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Maybe philosophers are not going to get into the same kind of trouble. Yeah, but you might say, look, because on the island of Samos, they say just a piece of wood washed ashore. And I don't know exactly how, but the people realized it was really Hera, the goddess. And so they started worshiping it. Well, that's fine. They couldn't get rid of it. They couldn't move it.
Very rich.
Yes. And in a sense, a philosophical image that works with words, that does not try to create a visual likeness, might connect with its subject matter in that way that a plank of wood could connect with the goddess Hera.
Okay. Is there anybody? We are 5 or 6 minutes late for the next follow. Nevertheless, one more question. Okay. You can speak. You can ask question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Please a short question.
Oh yeah, I'll make it short. Thanks for the fascinating talk. I have just very, very basic questions. So in while listening to your talk, I mean, I was reminded that in Symposium, it was described as if a kind of necessary step that we should start from the discovery of beautiful bodies, in order to ascend to the beauty itself. And do you think the kind of relationship that holds between the beautiful body and the beauty itself might be able to be viewed as kind of similar to the relationship that holds between the sculpture and the what the sculpture represents?
That is not a simple, short question, but thank you. That's fascinating, because I won't try to do justice to your question. Let me just say this. We can speak of beautiful bodies and beautiful souls. We do not, in any ordinary sense, say that the soul resembles the body or that the body resembles the soul, okay? They might have this quality of beauty in common, although what that quality is, then we could spend our lives trying to say. But yes, as in that sense that the beautiful body somehow connects you to the beautiful soul, or gets your appetite up so that you're then finding the beauty of the soul, in just the way that the Silenus image opens up to show something else inside, right? Yes, in that way I take, and of course there we have a sculpture again, in that way I take that progression in the symposium to resemble what I've been talking about with the connection between statues and the objects they represent. But that's only the beginning of an answer. Thank you.